evening, everyone. Good afternoon, perhaps good morning, wherever you're joining us from. It's lovely to see you and to have you here today, day 3 of our Summer Institute. I am Dr. Shawnee Hardware. I am a vibrant first Jamaican cisgendered woman who has been teaching at George Brown College for the past almost a year now. And my initial research looks at student engagement and community engagement. But more recently, I have been focusing on anti-racism practices and how those impact the lived experiences or can improve the lived experiences of so many racialized people in Canada. So the topic that we're discussing today, especially as a professor in the School of Early Childhood at George Brown, is very pertinent to my practice, and I know to most of us, if not all of us here today. Before we get more into the program and align with anti-racism practices, we will do the land acknowledgement.
Acknowledging land is something Indigenous people have been practicing for generations, long before settlers arrived. Recognizing the land you are on is an expression of respect and gratitude. OPSU Local 557 would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat, which is now home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We also acknowledge that Toronto is a treaty territory, a relationship between the Mississaugas of the Credit and Canada. This land is also part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the land. Other Indigenous people, settlers, and newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. This means we are all treaty people. As such, it is our responsibility to honor and respect this land and express gratitude for the opportunity to work on and share this land. All my relations. All my relations basically translates to we're all related. It's a reminder that everything in the universe is part of a single whole and is connected in some way to everything else. This means everything and everyone are our relatives, and that they have a purpose and are worthy of respect and care, especially the land and each other. Thank you, Miigwech, Walalyuk, all my relations.
Okay, thank you very much. And as we go through the day session, indeed live, let us reflect on the land acknowledgement, especially a focus on relationships, right? Because relationships are so pertinent to the work that we do as educators and as researchers. More importantly, it is vital for us to reflect in this space as we talk about climate change and the impact of or how the environment or teaching young children about the environment can lead to them being better citizens. So over the past 2 days, we've been hearing from distinguished scholars and educators about the work that they have been doing as it relates to environmental sustainability. Today, we'll focus more specifically on research and pedagogical practices that involve the land. And the question is, how could we meaningfully engage young people in conversation around the land? So as one of our presenters said yesterday, that they begin to see themselves as a part of the environment rather than the environment being outside of them. And that is our call. I know in recent times in Western theorizing and following the Reggio Emilia approach, there has been a big shift at looking at the environment as a third teacher. But how can we, by adopting Indigenous ways of being, seeing ourselves as being a part of the environment, in fact, the environment in some regards, and embrace our pedagogy, align our research along with this. But I know I'm not one of the panelists for today, so I will not go much further with that. We do have a lineup of very distinguished panelists, so I'll introduce them in the order that they'll present for a smooth transition, and then that will be the last that you'll hear from me. And then you'll hear from me again at the question and answer section. Please note that the chat is disabled. So if you do have a question, please enter your question in the Q&A tab that's at the bottom. And then we will wrap up our session today within 2 hours. So looking forward to your engagement. With us today, we have Keith McCrady, who is the Executive Director of Two-Spirited People of One Nation. Keith McCrady is an Ojibwe and Cree from the Bear Clan, who has worked with Indigenous families for over 30 years. Born in Thunder Bay, a place that I hope to visit pretty soon, Keith. So we'll keep in contact. And raised traditionally by both parents in Blig-Jik-Wabik, and I apologize for mispronouncing these, Zagin Anishinaabe, formerly Rocky Bay First Nation. Keith says that becoming a leader in his community was an integral part of his journey. As the executive director of the Two-Spirited People of the First Nation, Keith's goal is to walk alongside the two-spirited Indigenous LGBTQ community and provide them with the education and support to reclaim our place in the circle. Following Keith, you will hear from Claire Stevenson-Blythe. Claire is a registered professional planner at Fotenn Planning and Design in Toronto, who brings curiosity and empathy to complex urban issues. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Environment and Urban Sustainability from formerly Ryerson University, now TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University, and a Master's of Planning from the University of Toronto. She has worked on a range of public and nonprofit projects in the GTA, including age-friendly neighborhood built, form audits, policy development, affordable and net zero energy housing development. Oh, Claire, this is very important work, especially the current conversations, right, around affordable housing. Claire is increasingly interested in the intersection of climate change and urban planning, especially how public policy can inform and implement environmental change. So there's more about Claire's work in the Institute's booklet, if you're interested in reading more. Then I will go over to Dr. Monica McGlynn-Stewart, who is my colleague. She works at George Brown in the School of Early Childhood. I'm just taking note of your last name, Dr. Monica, and it took the Summer Institute for us to be so formally acquainted. She's a professor in the School of Early Childhood at George Brown College, Toronto, Ontario. She teaches courses in curriculum, education policy, and research methods. She's a former elementary teacher, principal, and consultant. She was a principal investigator on a SSHRC-funded research, Tools or Toys, using application for open literacy learning, and that ran from 2015 to 2019. She has gotten other big funding, including her more recent work, SSHRC-funded research on designing and implementing environmental inquiry strategies in urban early years in Canada. And this project will run until next year. And then we have Dr. Jennifer Gallo Fox, who is an associate professor in the Department of Human Development and Family Sciences in the Early Childhood Program at University of Delaware. Dr. Gallo Fox is specializing in early childhood curriculum instruction, science education, teacher learning, and the role of lab schools in educator development. She works closely with the lab school at the University of Delaware on research collaborations to support early educator learning, science education, and actively supported the program through the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much, Dr. Gallo, for your work. And accompanying Dr. Gallo would be Katie Pollock. Katie has been at the lab school for the past 17 years. Katie completed a Delaware Nature Society naturalist training and is a certified naturalist. Creek exploration, woods walks, and trail adventures became a bigger part of her curriculum. Katie loves watching the children soak up this peace and energy and wonder that comes from being outside. She earned a Master's of Science in Literacy from Willingham University and a Bachelor's of Science in Early Childhood Education from the University of Delaware. Katie is also an undergraduate instructor and clinical educator at the University of Delaware. I'll now hand over to Keith McCrady.
Hi, thank you, Shawnee, and thank you all for having me today. So like I said, my name is Keith McCrady. I actually have my own given name, which I gave myself when I was 10 years old, and it's Mahogany Mukwa. And it kind of brings me back to why am I working at Two-Spirit People of First Nations? But I'll flash back a little bit. I started working with children 30 years ago. I know it seems impossible because that would mean I started when I was 1 year old, but I'm just kidding. But I started when I was 19 years old, and it had to do with my past trauma. I was a child who was, sexually abused, and I have no issue talking about it. And I'm not here to trigger or traumatize anyone, but just to share my truth. And I knew that no one was there for me. I knew that no one, I felt very alone. I felt very confused about what happened to me. I actually didn't really understand it, but I knew that I didn't want it to happen to anyone else. And so I decided to become a foster parent. And I met my children's mom when we were really young, and I was in university, and I kind of moved to the big city. I actually left my reservation high school graduation day because it wasn't a safe place for me. I knew that I had to somehow get out, and that was my way of getting out, and it worked. But obviously, I wasn't ready for the big city. I kind of got a little lost in my focus. Kind of went to school, partied a little bit. Had to go back home for a minute and then decide, okay, what do I really want? Because everyone told me I was intelligent. You should go to engineering. I didn't even know what that was. That's how isolated I was as a little Indigenous kid. But I knew that I wanted to do something with people. And so I applied for social work because that's all I knew. Again, what's social work? That's helping people. That's what I wanted to do. And then one day someone came to me and said, you should take early childhood education. There's not many Indigenous people. There's not many males. And I'm like, okay, sounds good. And I got in right away. It was quite easy. And I started. And at the same time, I signed up to be a foster parent with my kid's mom. When we met, we had shared trauma. We had shared experiences. And we were like, we're going to protect all the little Native children. And that's really was our goal. And we quickly learned we didn't have the skills. We didn't know what we were doing. We just had love, and it wasn't enough. We weren't really doing justice. We were helping children meet their basic needs, but we needed more. And so when I went to early childhood education, I really appreciated the way that the information I got. I still had a difficult time learning because I didn't learn by reading. I didn't learn by going home and doing studies and reports. The system wasn't set up for me, and I knew that. And so I knew I had to really pay attention. I knew that I had to communicate. I knew that I had to go back on all the things I've learned as a child, as a teen. I was a teen who was a little hustler. I was on the reservation, about 200 people. I wanted to make money, so I babysat. And I think all this is important and relevant to my story, so bear with me. But I knew that there was more to what was happening in my community. And so when I learned early childhood education, to me, it made sense. To me, it reflected the cultural Indigenous values. People are unique and individual. Children are unique and individual. We could learn by doing. We didn't have to learn by reading. Children, when I taught with children and sang with children and discovered with children, it evoked so much out of me. And I really appreciated that. So anyways, I just want to flash back to myself as a young person. I was raised traditionally. My reservation is called Bijachwabik Zagin and Shnabek. My parents both had our language. They're from residential school. They didn't speak to me in it, but I heard it all the time. I heard the values. I heard the teachings. We would spend our winters, snaring and trapping. We would go ice fishing. I watched and I learned. In the spring would be the goose hunt. We would go out as a community hunting geese. And then in the summer, fishing, all of these things. We would build sweat lodge in the fall using all the things around us, and so on. And the cycle kind of continued. I remember knowing that we had to go smelt fishing in the middle of the night. And so school was the second priority. We all went out and we all did the smelt fishing and kind of get up. I value that. I value that our culture is different than what we learn in mainstream. I remember berry picking, and my mom was a champion berry picker. She would pick so many pails and we would come back with like a half a pail and she did 6, I remember seeing bears while we're berry picking, and my mom wasn't afraid of them. We were young and we went running to the car, and she would be like, they're just doing what we're doing. They're just preparing for their winter time. They're just eating. They're doing all these things. I remember the first time that I had to clean a fish and cut it open, and I was mortified. I was like, how can we do this to this animal? And my father would tell me about, well, this is what we have to eat. We don't have access to the food that other people have. Definitely moose meat, beaver, fish, rabbit, geese, partridge were all part of our daily meals. We had to collect enough for the community. My aunts and uncles, not everyone had the same father or male figure who are hunters. Traditionally in our community, the females were traditionally the people who prepared. And if we weren't colonialized, the Two-Spirit people would be either one of those. And I could talk more about that if people actually wanted to know. So I remember my father was a medicine man and going out to the forest. I remember him pointing and saying, oh, there's hazelnuts. And I was like, what? There's hazelnuts in Northern Ontario? How does he see that? I don't see what he sees. I'd have to be a meter away to see it. I remember going and understanding that there's things under the ground and digging for roots and using them to prepare things to help heal us. I remember having a cedar bath when I was ill. Sorry, I get emotional. So anyways, I'm here. I'm a very purposeful person. I'm very transparent. I'm here because of my relationship with Patricia. And I respect that. I respect that people have built relationships. I'm here because of that relationship. When I heard the land acknowledgement, sorry, I actually did 2 speaking engagements today, and they were quite emotional, talking about mental health and trauma. And I know that doesn't really relate to this, but it's a lot to share. And I'm not trying to distract from what we're supposed to be talking about, but I'm a person who lives in the moment, and which is why I don't have a presentation. I've learned a lot about, who I am. Land-based learning, early childhood education, working with families is my passion. And when I heard the land acknowledgement, it was done really well. But what does it mean? What are we going to do differently as a community? We, as Indigenous people, we have a relationship with the land. These things I talked about aren't 30 years ago, they're today. This is what my community does back home. I left because I had to. This is still a reality for them. And so when we talk about children and learning, we could learn so much from the earth. We could learn so much from doing. And it's not so much just getting outside and putting out hula hoops and jumping through them. That's education. That sounds very Western still to me. It's wonderful. Being inside is not going to be helping anyone. But really, land-based is about what's actually happening in the earth. It's actually what's happening right now. Look around in the summer. Summer is a time to rest. Summer is a time to celebrate. We work so hard in the winter to prepare for, and this fall to prepare. That's when we talk. We don't do storytelling in the summer. We allow children to run free and play and explore. I remember when I was an early childhood educator and I was really young, I won the Prime Minister's Award for Excellence in Early Childhood Education. And the reason was I was just so creative and I was allowed to be. The ideal of safety it wasn't about, oh, are you putting children at risk? It was about what's the worst that could happen? What's the best that could happen? I remember taking children out to a pond. Can we go walking in the pond? Yes, but you might hurt your feet. So make sure that you're ready for that. What was in the pond? Little tadpoles. And then you could talk about it, the life cycle. You could talk about why the fish turn into, or the little tadpoles turn into frogs, and what they do and how they eat and what happens to who eats the frogs. You could do a walk around in the fall. What are the signs of fall? Well, you could prepare children by seeing the leaves are changing. What happens when they fall to the ground? Why are the geese flying away? Where are they going? These are all the things that, to me, are valuable in land-based and very much part of traditional Indigenous culture. I'm very proud that it was working before colonization. I'm really proud that groups like this want to embrace that and want to go, I think, back to how people have always learned, how Indigenous people have always learned. I remember the first time we had, a goose hunt. So our community actually shuts down for a week, and they still do. And we would shut down, didn't go to school, no one had to work, as long as you went to the goose hunt, and it became a time to celebrate. And we talked about why are the geese coming back, and we talked about taking what you need. What an amazing concept, taking what you need. As a culture, we take more than we need. We keep reinforcing that as a community. We do what's convenient. And my agency, we're celebrating a powwow. It's the first Two-Spirit powwow. And again, I'm sorry for not explaining what Two-Spirit is for some people. So let me bear with me again for a minute. Two-Spirit is a umbrella term that was used to describe people. So some of the 2S LGBTQ community, 2S is Two-Spirit. It means I am a gay Indigenous man, I'm Two-Spirit. That's correct, but it's not the only definition. It's part of this umbrella. It also means that I am nor male nor female. My spirit is both. I'm a Two-Spirit person. That is my gender. That is actually how I identify in the last few years. But that's disrespectful. The true understanding for me is that is a place in our circle, that is skills and gifts that we have, that I have the gifts of mediation, that I have gifts of intuition, that I have gifts of ceremony and healing, that I have gifts of leadership. That's what Two-Spirit is to me. And I was 40 years old when I took on that role. It was a responsibility that I took. And it's a place in the circle of Indigenous people. And when I think of young Two-Spirit people or young children, it brings me back to the classrooms that keep pushing gender, that people have such a hard time to. Yes, it's part of the things we got to check box, but we don't believe it. We don't honor it. It's just something that we have to do. We have to have these gender neutral things. People are uncomfortable when a boy puts on a dress. People are uncomfortable when a girl wants to do things that aren't typical, stereotypical. And that brings me back to how when we learn because of what we're exposed to and what we're shown. And we're really, and I know this is probably not the platform that I was meant to share this, but we're really doing a disservice to children. One of the things I've been telling folks is, as Two-Spirit people, we should be acknowledging all children as Two-Spirit so that when they're growing up, they could decide whether this is something that is part of their culture, part of their journey. And if it's not, well, definitely it's already acceptable to not be. maybe that's what we need to do. I apologize for steering off of what we meant to talk about, but this is who I am, and this is what brought me here, was wanting to share what I know and what I do best. Ceremony, when we talk about ceremony, there's Indigenous teachings of ceremony, moontime ceremony, sweat lodge, shaking tent, all of these things. But to me, ceremony is celebrating the things that happen in life. Sitting on the grass with your friend, talking about their future, talking about what's going on in their lives. That's ceremony. And I think we could teach that to children quite easily to, really focus on what we're doing, how the sun warms our face and what happens to our mental health when we sit out in the sun. That's land-based to me. Plants and how we need food to sustain ourselves, but how some foods are going to benefit us and our health and protect us, and how some foods are really going to celebrate, us as people by sharing together. I don't need all of this food. The teachings of this Three Sisters, the Three Sisters soup is a soup that's made of 3 plants that grow together very well. Corn and squash, and I should know the other one. I can't think of it right now. I'm pretty tired. That's what land-based is to me, and that's what I think really we could focus on and give children opportunities to understand what's going around them. And maybe then we will respect, what we have instead of taking resources, which someone was just talking about the election, putting people in power and decision who are going to do best for the next 7 generations, not just for ourselves, not just for the people that we like, not for the people who benefit us, but for the future 7 generations to come. That's part of the 7 generations teaching. Anyways, I think I took up most of my time. I wasn't sure, but there was examples that I could share about, how we could celebrate things, the way that we plant. I actually recently COVID made me need to do something, so I put a greenhouse in my yard and started planting. I had no idea what I'm doing, but I started planting seeds in the garden. I learned how to make traditional medicines, planting tobaccos. We had these tobacco plants. Who knew that tobacco was this beautiful flower, and all we know is it in a cigarette form. Those things are very valuable for us to learn and to share.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Okay. Keith, thank you very much for that lively presentation. In the interest of time, we will move to Claire.
And thank you, Keith, for that presentation. And it made me think that in many ways, urban planning, which is the perspective that I'm speaking from, is far removed from this land-based learning and taking what you need and concepts of sharing. So as I go through this presentation, I'm going to, take what Keith was saying to think about what I'm saying as well. And I encourage everyone else to. So my name is Claire Stevenson-Blythe, and I'm an urban planner working at Fotenn Planning and Design in Toronto. Today, I'll be speaking from the urban planning perspective, specifically looking at which municipal policies can encourage and promote spaces and initiatives that both serve young children and mitigate the impacts of climate change. Personally, I'm expecting my first child in just over a month, so this has given me a unique perspective to consider this topic from. So as a planner, and when speaking from the planning perspective, it's important to acknowledge that the foundation of planning in Canada, and Toronto specifically, is rooted in the colonial process. The ordering and management of land done by early colonists, including land parceling, land grants, and later, which we still use today, land use designations and zoning, coded space depending on value determined by the colonial agenda. So Toronto, as we know it, is rooted in the Toronto Purchase, which took place in 1787 when representatives of the British government purchased over 250,000 acres from the Mississaugas of the Credit for 10 shillings. There was a difference in interpretation as to what had transpired, as the British thought they had bought the land, but the Indigenous interpretation, as was outlined in Douglas Laforme's 2017 article in the Torontoist, was that the land was to be made freely available to the settlers, that these gifts would be given in perpetuity, and that no one, in fact, can own the earth. This began the ordering of the space we know today, with the layout of Toronto, the street system, based on mirroring the layout of the lot system that was based on the British acre. So Libby Porter, an MIT scholar who studies Indigenous rights and urban planning, writes on this and says that in a colonial context, planning was a way for ideas, expectations, and cultures of Europe to be transported and modified for use in what was considered a new world. So this presentation will focus on the intersection of climate change and children in cities. Children are experiencing the impacts of climate change in many ways. So through the urban heat island effect, which is represented by urbanized areas experiencing higher temperatures than outlying areas, and is often attributed to structures absorbing and re-emitting the sun's heat more than natural landscapes like forests and water bodies. They're experiencing heat waves, floods, wildfires, among others, and all of these results of a change in climate reduce time spent outdoors for leisure, physical activity, and play, and contribute to a more dangerous environment for young children to grow up in. With limited space in cities for children, changes in climate further reduce our already direly needed spaces, and this is felt even more by children in neighborhoods with less access to green space, which is distributed unevenly across the city. So for this talk, I thought about cities as urban children's first teachers. So a child surrounded by parks and trees, living in neighborhoods they can walk and cycle around safely, and having close access to naturalized areas may have an opportunity to learn from these spaces and about how to spend time outdoors, how different elements of nature interact with one another, and how to develop relationships with these areas. The idea of cities as our first teachers highlights the importance of planning in cities. How is the distribution of space contributing to good teaching? How can policies ensure there's a balance of opportunities for children in cities, especially when changes in our climate are threatening the few spaces that exist? And further, by learning about nature, biodiversity, and our Earth from a young age, right in the cities in which we live, there's more of an opportunity for those children to grow up and protect it. What we learn to love, we protect. This is touched on in Toronto's Growing Up Guidelines, where they call this ecological literacy, which teaches children environmental values and which promotes a resilient city. So the way climate change impacts young children is similar in many ways to how it impacts other age groups. The impacts are unique to children, however, in that they carry a sense of urgency. The effects will be felt by our children throughout their lives, and they're already feeling it. This urgency for future generations and between the present generation was described in connection to the idea of justice in the 2012 article out of the University of Lüneburg, which said that the principle of sustainability contains two objectives of justice regarding the conservation and use of ecosystems and their services. The first is justice between different people of the present generation, and this is intergenerational justice. And the second being justice between people of different generations, which is intergenerational justice. The urgency of climate change is felt differently across children in the present generation and will be increasingly felt by children in future generations. So before I delve into policies, how do we address climate change? This may be very repetitive at this point. We know that we need to reduce carbon emissions through mitigation and adaptation. For this presentation, I'm focusing on mitigation, and this can include carbon sequestration from green spaces and canopy and reducing automobile use. I began to look at spaces and aspects of the city that are both beneficial to children and for mitigating the impacts of climate change to think deeper about this relationship. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but a starting point, and these are parks and open spaces, which include the naturalized areas of Toronto, such as the Don River, the 15-minute neighborhood design, and the urban forest. Parks and open spaces provide numerous benefits to children. They offer shade for playing and spending time. offer interesting structures for children to engage with, such as playgrounds, and offer opportunities for outdoor exercising and socializing in the fresh air. They provide numerous benefits to the earth and climate as well, with trees that are often present at parks sequestering carbon dioxide, with parks providing rainwater absorption through grass and natural areas, which mitigates floods, providing a habitat for local flora and fauna, and reducing the urban heat island effect. Naturalized areas and spaces with programming also fall into this category, such as Evergreen Brickworks in Toronto, which provides learning opportunities for children to build ecological literacy, and naturalized areas such as the Don Valley or Humber River. Toronto is known for having an incredible amount of ravines, and these ravines were caused by rivers, but sadly, most of these rivers and streams have been buried. A few examples of these are Garrison Creek, Cattle Creek, and Wendigo Creek. And on the right, you can see the Lost Rivers map that shows all of those lost rivers that used to flow through Toronto. So the next element of a city is the 15-minute neighborhood that can provide benefits for children and reduce the impacts on climate change. The definition of a 15-minute neighborhood from the Ottawa Official Plan is that they are compact, well-connected, with a clustering of diverse mix of land uses, such as a range of housing types and affordabilities, shops, services, access to food, schools, daycare, employment, green space, park, and pathways. They are complete communities that support active transportation and transit, reduce car dependency, and enable people to live car light or car free. These neighborhoods allow children and their families, and children individually once growing older, to walk and cycle to reach their destinations, giving them an increased sense of independence and social and physical health benefits. Young children can learn the benefits of walking, cycling, and taking transit, and can continue this relationship with their surroundings as they get older. The network of streets and the block pattern helps children and anyone exploring a city to make sense of the urban environment around them and to easily access food, entertainment, leisure, and daily destinations like school. 15-minute neighborhoods encourage active transportation, which has positive climate impacts as carbon dioxide emissions are reduced. Many traditional pre-war cities are planned in this way, and this is evident in the older neighborhoods in Toronto. So the urban forest also has immense benefits for children. It offers shade to play under and spend time outdoors, improves the air quality, and moderates temperatures. The presence of trees also supports mental health. From an environmental perspective, the urban forest sequesters carbon dioxide, it mitigates stormwater runoff through rainwater interception, offers habitat for wildlife, reduces the urban heat island effect, and offers shade to homes and buildings, which reduces energy consumption. Interestingly, Toronto's ravine system contributes significantly to the urban forest, representing 38% of the city's tree cover. So these attributes of the city are not distributed equally across Toronto, however, and are closely tied to other factors such as income and race. This map from the City of Toronto's Parkland Strategy shows priority areas where there is low parkland provision, high growth, and a high percentage of low-income residents in the orange color. That to say, areas with few parks are often associated with lower incomes, and in this case, high growth. U of T master student Sarah Burrell undertook an equity assessment of Toronto's 15-minute neighborhoods and found that socio-spatial inequities exist within Toronto's inner suburban neighborhoods. These inequities demonstrate the difficulty of a 15-minute neighborhood design without first resolving structural challenges within these communities. She concluded her study with finding that to achieve 15-minute communities across Toronto, implementation within Toronto's inner suburbs will require an overarching race-based and equity-based lens of analysis, improved community services focused on reducing child and youth poverty, targeted employment and training opportunities, and public and active transportation infrastructure. The benefits of the urban forest are also not felt equally across socioeconomic levels, representing environmental injustice within Toronto. 3 professors from the Toronto Metropolitan University examined the spatial relationship between median household income and tree canopy variables in Toronto. They found that in Toronto, there's a measurable inequality of access to the urban tree canopy based on median household income. So looking at these maps, where the one on the left is the median household income and the one on the right is the total canopy percentage, you can see a similar pattern where in many cases, areas with higher median household income also have higher total canopy percentage. So moving on to think about policies, today cities are planned through policies. Provincial policies, such as the Provincial Policy Statement and the Growth Plan, give direction to many matters, including climate change, and specifically give direction to municipalities to more specifically direct through their official plans. Zoning bylaws are regulatory tools that offer direction to matters outlined in official plans. So looking at Toronto, what policies, guidelines, and strategies have been undertaken to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change? The City of Toronto official plan, which acts as a guiding document, includes direction on climate change. Toronto Green Standard is the sustainable design and performance requirements for new private and city-owned developments since 2010. This is the way that sustainability efforts are baked into the development process. Toronto's Growing Up Guidelines are guidelines to direct growth in vertical communities like condos and apartments to design specifically for children. These guidelines encourage opportunities to integrate sustainable design into new development in the public realm. And the Green Streets Technical Guidelines provide direction for a range of green infrastructure options for Toronto's street types and conditions. There are also a number of strategies that Toronto has initiated, such as Transform TO, the net zero energy strategy, which aims for Toronto to be net zero by 2040, 10 years earlier than initially proposed. The Resilience strategy, which aims to help Toronto survive, adapt, and thrive in the face of climate change and growing inequities. The Biodiversity strategy, which aims to promote a livable city that supports biodiversity, and the Ravine strategy, which aims to help support a ravine system that is natural, connected, and essential for the health and the well-being of the city. Beyond policies, Toronto has introduced a number of programs and initiatives, such as the goal for Toronto's tree canopy target of 40% by 2050, and intends to use a tree equity analysis to do this. The program Expanding Housing Options in Neighborhoods, which seeks to bring more density into established neighborhoods that are typical of a 15-minute neighborhood design. Investments into the cycling network, such as Bloor Street Bike Lane projects, investments into the TTC and GO Transit network, initiatives to expand waterfront parks, such as the naturalization of the Don River, and the declaration on October 2nd, 2019, where City Council voted unanimously to declare a climate emergency and adopted a stronger emissions target for Toronto. So we can see that these initiatives, policies, strategies do fit under these three categories that I went through. So there is action being taken towards these areas of the cities that we know are good for both children and climate change. It's clear that Toronto's committed to taking action through the various policies, strategies, and initiatives, but is there a need to take action with a sense of urgency that is needed for young children? Returning to the aspects of the urban environment that benefits both children and mitigates impacts of climate change, we can think again about the definitions of intragenerational justice and intergenerational justice. Planning for children in a changing climate means an increasing need for urgent and equitable action. Investments in urban elements such as parks and public spaces, 15-minute neighborhood designs in the urban forest must be made equally across socioeconomic levels and with a sense of urgency that responds to climate change. While this is not an exhaustive list, but an offering of a direction based on the research conducted for this presentation. Parks and open spaces can be prioritized in areas with low income, low parkland supply, and high growth, as we saw in Toronto's parkland strategy. 15-minute neighborhoods should be prioritized in Toronto's inner suburbs, while considering barriers such as unemployment and low transit and active transportation access, as we saw in the equity analysis on the 15-minute neighborhoods. And a tree equity approach should be continued to be used across Toronto's neighborhoods to reduce the relationship between median household income and canopy cover, as we saw in the article from Toronto Metro University. The same efforts that must respond to an urgent issue for young children can also work towards distributing benefits for all children, not just those.
I've just given you a time signal around 1 more minute to wrap up, please.
Perfect. This is my last slide. The perfect time. Benefits for all children, not just those living in affluent neighborhoods. And with that, thank you for listening to my presentation, and let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. Well timed. So we can see just very quickly the need to move beyond the superficial, both emphasized in Claire's and Keith's presentation. I'll now hand over to Dr. Monica McGill-Stewart and her research team. And Monica, if you could ask your research team to introduce themselves before they present, then that would be lovely. Thank you.
Okay, do you mean before we speak, or like all of us together and then begin the presentation?
Before each speak, thank you.
Okay, so I'm Monica. And I would like to thank the previous two speakers. That was amazing, thought-provoking. Welcome to our presentation. It's entitled The Power of Gratitude, Incorporating Indigenous Perspectives on Land-Based Learning in Early Learning Settings. So this presentation will provide an overview and some lessons we've learned during the 2 years of an ongoing 3-year project that's exploring ways to integrate Indigenous perspectives on land-based learning into mainstream urban childcare centers. It will include some of the concepts and resources that we have shared with our participants and a brief case study of what this learning can look like in a preschool room that's in our study. In general, what we have found is that when adults, the educators in the room, and us as researchers, focus on expressing gratitude for the gifts of the natural world, something we've been learning from our Indigenous partners. And when we affirm and support children's natural curiosity and interest in the natural world, children and adults become more attuned to and engaged with the world around us. This in turn leads to deepened relationships and a desire to care for and give back to our non-human relatives. So we'll begin our presentation with a Briefland Acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that the land where this research is taking place is Treaty 13 land, which is a treaty between the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the federal government. And this land has been inhabited and cared for by many Indigenous nations for thousands of years, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is currently home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And we are grateful to live and work on this land. So these are our research questions, but we won't be addressing them all today. Our focus in this presentation is on question number 3. What perspectives and practices support children's development of connections with the natural world? Most of the research team are non-Indigenous. We're seeking to understand Indigenous perspectives through listening, reading, viewing, discussing, and consulting with Indigenous writers, educators, and knowledge keepers, and then thinking about how to provide learning resources for busy working ECEs and how to support them as they put these ideas and concepts into practice in preschool classrooms. We're very grateful to have the support of our team member, Lori Budge, an Indigenous faculty member at George Brown College, who unfortunately could not be with us today.
So, hi, I'm Nicola McGuire. I'm the Director of Research and Pedagogical Leadership for the Learning Enrichment Foundation, and I'm very grateful to be part of this research team. So we started our literature review by considering academic studies on the many physical health, mental health, and learning and development benefits of outdoor play. These studies focus on what children gain from playing outdoors and in nature. We were also motivated by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which calls for reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and with the land, and to incorporate Indigenous history, culture, and perspectives into curriculum at all levels of education. This calls on us to consider a different worldview, one in which we are to focus not what we can take from the land, but our responsibilities to give back to the First Peoples and to the natural world. However, it was not just the academic literature and the TRC that were the initial motivators for this project, but also teachings and encouragement from Bob Crawford, an Indigenous counselor at George Brown College. He encouraged us to try to find ways to incorporate Indigenous perspectives into early years programs. He told us that we would probably make mistakes, and when that happened, we could ask for forgiveness and guidance and then keep trying. So this gave us the courage to try. For us, this is not just an academic endeavor, but an emotional journey. It requires emotional support along the way. Lori Budge joined the team and has been providing us with much needed guidance and support. Lori told us that she was not going to either rubber stamp our ideas and initiatives or to scold us, but to share what she knows. This has been really invaluable in our learning journey. The other members of the team are not Indigenous people. We are settlers who had little knowledge of Indigenous perspectives, and we have learned a lot, including how much more there is to learn. This definition of land-based learning comes from the OISE introduction to a newsletter on literature on Indigenous history, knowledge, and perspectives. Land-based education assumes an environmental approach to learning that recognizes the deep connection and relationship of Indigenous peoples to the land. It seeks to offer education pertaining to the land that is grounded with Indigenous knowledge and pedagogy. Through this approach, it is acknowledged that it is the cultivation and observation of the relationship between people and the land that knowing and learning occurs. This is an overview of our methods. So it's a 3-year qualitative case study. We're finishing year 2 this month. And our data sources include interviews with the educators, so at the beginning of the study and then at the end of each year. The research team's observations and documentation, which is collected bi-weekly, and educator observations and documentation. So each of the sites is given an iPad so they can document their experiences, their outdoor and nature experiences. And educators sharing during the biannual workshops as well that we hold. The participants are 20 early years educators. They're working in teams of 2 in preschool classrooms, and the children are aged 2.5 to 4 years old. And we have 10 sites for this study.
Hello, I'm Anna Luisa, and I'm the research coordinator for this study. So we chose to conduct our study in urban, not-for-profit childcare centers because children in these centers typically have less access to natural areas. We wanted to see if we could bring the benefits of learning with and from nature into these urban spaces. Some of the centers were attached to schools, post-secondary institutions, or social service agencies. Here are some photographs of the playgrounds. As you can see, there is limited access to nature. Some had some trees, shrubs, grass within the playground. Some had it outside the fence. Over the past 2 years, we have provided the centers with materials and resources and invited them to listen to the teachings of Indigenous guest speakers at our workshops. We also invited them to share what they were doing in their programs with the whole group. The educators were invited to integrate the ideas and resources into their programs at their own pace and using their own professional judgment. One of the very first Indigenous perspectives that we introduced to the centers was the concept of all my relations. The idea that all of creation is connected in a web of reciprocal relationships. We had 2 Indigenous guest speakers at our workshops, Emma Greenfield and Caroline Crawley, who provided this teaching for us. We also provided picture books by Indigenous authors to support the children's introduction to the concepts of relationships and care and reciprocity, as well as further reading for educators. All of the links to the resources we mentioned in this presentation will be provided and available to you. We also shared information about treaties in the form of picture books for children and websites, videos, and online learning modules for the educators and the research team.
So hello, my name is Kayla Ritchie, and I'm a research assistant on this research team. A perspective that we shared early on in the project and that has been a constant theme throughout our observations, interviews, and workshops is the concept of gratitude for the gifts of the natural world. These beautiful picture books and this video by Elder David Kirshen powerfully brought that perspective into the childcare centers. During our second workshop in year 1, Lori Budge, our team member and advisor, introduced the 7 grandfather teachings. We followed up by providing a video link for the educators and picture books for the children. Later, educators asked us for more resources to support their practice, so we added this poster and puppets of the animals that embody the 7 teachings. So it has been challenging to find resources on residential schools for preschool children. The educators have told us that they have found that these books, Stolen Words and Phyllis's Orange Shirt, are meaningful to the children and provide an introduction to this part of our history. This study is taking place as hundreds of unmarked graves of Indigenous children are being found near residential schools around the country. This has been a powerful reminder that the ramifications of the trauma of residential schools are still reverberating through Indigenous communities and of the need for truth and reconciliation.
Hello, my name is Dana, and I am also a research assistant on this team. We have been learning about land-based pedagogy from 2 teachers, Elder Willie Ermine and Dr. Hopi Martin. Both approaches emphasize following children's lead and supporting them to deepen their relationship with the land. We encourage you to follow the links at the end of the presentation to learn more about these approaches. In the initial interviews, educators were asked what materials they would like to enhance their outdoor education programs. In addition to providing what they asked for, such as magnifying glasses and gardening tools, we also provided additional materials such as mud kitchens and nature identification sheets. The materials and resources were delivered to the centers, and as we discussed various topics through our newsletters and workshops. In year 2, we continued to deliver more resources, both at the request of the educators and as we discovered them. These included animal footprints, leaf tiles, and bug stones. These resources supported the children in their nature explorations, both indoors and outdoors.
Hello, I'm Taylor Rowe, and I'm also a research assistant for this project. To give you a sense of how the Indigenous perspectives of gratitude, care, and reciprocity for all our relations are being incorporated into practice, we're going to focus on 1 preschool class in the study. We will include 2 stories that the educators in the program shared at our workshops and 2 observations by one of our research team members. Here's the educator's story in year 1. She shares facts with the children about tree roots, but also encourages empathy with the tree and the need to care for the tree. The children eagerly engage in protecting the tree. Over the last week, the children have been noticing some tree roots poking out in our playground. It has sparked multiple conversations on how and why they think the tree root is poking out. Some of the children have been curious, and a few began to pull out the roots. This began a conversation about the different parts of a tree and how pulling out the roots is hurtful to the tree. We discussed the importance of the tree's roots, how the tree needs its roots to grow, and how we need to help protect them. As we were conversing, one of the children, RV, and I began discussing the different ways we can protect the tree roots so that we were not tripping over them or trying to pull them from the ground. RV looked around the playground and noticed the rocks. He suggested we use them so that others could see them and began piling up rocks and sand to cover the tree root. RV then suggested that we could try and bury the roots in the sand and use a scoop to pour sand over the existing roots. In year 2, the educators at the same site shared a story which illustrated that the children are supporting one another to express empathy and care for the trees without prompting from the adults. They also exhibit knowledge of how we are interconnected. The trees help us breathe and provide a home for insects. This was a conversation which the educator overheard and shared with us. B, you can't hurt the tree. B stopped and looked at the girls. Yeah, another agreed. The trees are so special. B shrugged his shoulders and stood beside the tree. If you break our tree, it will be so sad because the tree helps us breathe, right? She asked the others. Yeah, we have to take care of them. I know. Let's put rocks around it and then no one can get it. They began to place the rocks around the tree while another child placed a ladybug inside. This is the ladybug's home. Don't hurt its home. B then walks over to another tree and began patting it with his hand, demonstrating how he could take care of it. One of our research team members observed the following scene after the children had been reading the picture book, Nibby is Water, which talks about thanking and respecting water. These 3 children put their hands in the puddle of water and scrubbed them together. One child remarked to the rest about how they were all getting their hands clean. One of the children held up their hands to the educator and said, "Look," then put their hands back into the water and said, "I need to get off the dirt." The educator then asked, "How's everyone's hands looking?" And the child held up their hands and said, "Thank you, puddle. Goodbye, sand." And his friends followed his lead and said, "Thank you, water." This second observation from year 2 clearly shows the interest the children have in the geese visiting their neighborhood and the positive connection they feel with them. They eagerly greet the geese and call their friends to join them in watching them eat. The children and educators began staring at the sky as the sound of Canada geese got louder and louder. The geese flew over the playground and landed on a piece of land in front of the playground. The children ran over to observe the geese. All of the children began waving and saying, "Hello, geese, hello, geese." One child said to the geese, "Come here, please." The RA asked the child, "What do you think they're doing?" The child responded, "Eating. They like to eat grass." The child ran over to their friends on the playground and said to them, "Come, come, there's geese eating."
We don't have anything so grand as conclusions at this point, but we do have some thoughts that what we've learned that we'd like to share so far. So the educators are eager to learn about and incorporate environmental learning from Indigenous perspectives. Urban early year centers have limited access to natural space, but they're able to maximize what they have for learning. The children were attracted to and eagerly engaged with the natural world around them. And this is something that Lori pointed out to us, that the children are attuned to Indigenous perspectives such as gratitude, care, and reciprocal relationships with the natural world. And if supported, they're likely to grow up to advocate for just and sustainable treatment of the earth. In order to support the children, the adults, both the research team and the educators, have needed to develop our own relationships with the land. The Indigenous perspectives and gratitude for the gifts of the land have been key in this journey, as expressed by this preschool educator in the project at the end of year 1. We've definitely taken more of an appreciation towards nature. Things that we may have taken for granted before, we're showing appreciation and we're actually giving or feeling appreciation. We say what the tree provides for us, the warmth that the sun provides for us, just for all those things. And even in gardening, I approached it differently. It was almost like doing it for the first time, like there was just a feeling to it. And I think it was felt amongst all of us. We have a few recommendations for other childcare centers who may want to embark on a similar journey. The first would be to partner with an Indigenous knowledge keeper, elder, or friendship center for invaluable advice and support, and to use resources that are created by Indigenous authors, picture books, videos, articles, to give opportunities for educators to share and support one another. It is a process. And to respect the educators' decision-making with respect to how and when they incorporate perspectives into their own programs. Offer simple activity ideas that educators can take up and adapt if they choose. And take your time. Start small and keep sharing and offering resources and opportunities to connect. Thank you for listening to our learning journey, and we will be happy to take questions after all the presentations. And just a reminder, there are 5 more slides after this with all of the resources that we mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Monica and your team. Your presentation to me complements Keith's call for more meaningful land-based learning. So thank you for that. And also addresses Claire's comments around how to incorporate some of these more meaningfully and purposefully designed, especially around the lack of what seems to be natural environment in terms of shrubbery in the childcare center. So thank you for highlighting that. We have our last presentation for today, which is Dr. Jennifer Gallo Fox and her co-presenter, Katie Pollock. I now invite you to start, Dr. Gallo Fox.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Hardware. Thank you for inviting us. I want to thank each of the previous presenters and everyone who's organized this wonderful conference for inviting us to be here and to be able to participate. I've been learning so much during the past several days. You've all pushed my thinking and my worldviews and helped me think about my connection to the environment and the world and my work in it in a new way. So thank you. We are coming here from the University of Delaware, from the Lab School and the Department of Human Development and Family Sciences. And today we'll be talking about connecting children and teachers to the land through nature-based education and nature-based practices. I'm an associate professor in the department, and I teach in the early childhood education program, and have the great privilege of collaborating with the Lab School. And I'll let Katie introduce herself real briefly.
I'm Katie Pollock, and I am a teacher at the UD Lab School, and I'm also an instructor in the same department.
And we just want to acknowledge Dorit Radnai-Griffin, who cannot be here with us today. She's the director of the Lab School and is a tremendous leader and has enabled so much of the work that we'll be talking about today.
Jen, you're muted.
Yes.
Thank you, Katie. I'd like to start us off with our living land acknowledgement. The University of Delaware occupies land vital to the web of life for the Lenni Lenape and Nanticoke, who share their ancestry, history, and future in this region. European colonizers and later the United States forced members of these groups westward and northward, where they formed nations in present-day Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Ontario, Canada. Others never left or returned from exile when they could. We express our appreciation for the ongoing Indigenous stewardship of the ecologies and traditions of this region. And while the harms to Indigenous people and their homelands are beyond repair, we at the University of Delaware commit to building right relationships going forward by collaborating with the tribal leadership in actionable steps, which we're working to pursue. Here at the University of Delaware Lab School, we express our gratitude for the beauty and nourishment from this land, which we share with our community members, and we work collectively to support the connection, appreciation, and stewardship of the land through connecting children and teachers to nature and nature-based education and learning in, with, and for the land. So to introduce you to the University of Delaware Lab School, we're located in the mid-Atlantic portion of the United States. We're a university-affiliated early education laboratory and accredited by the NAEYC and our state and licensed by the state of Delaware. We have 5 school year programs for children ages 2 to 6 years. And we also have a Play and Grow program for children and their caregivers for children who are ages 3 months to 18 months. We run summer camp programs. We have 6 incredible teachers who also serve as instructors and clinical educators. They all have graduate degrees. Many of them either have or are working on nature-based educator certificates and administrative certificates. We have a director and 2 incredible hourly administrative assistants who keep the whole place running. I serve as a faculty partner, and the department works very closely with the lab school, which serves as the lab for our academic unit. Our students in the department are part of the teaching team when they're here working at the lab school, and they're viewed and treated as an integral part of the lab school. The lab school is a financially self-sustaining center, which means that it runs predominantly off the tuition of the children and families who participate in the lab school, with support from in terms of resources from the university. The goals and the mission of the lab school it has a strong commitment to high quality early education for the children, the families, and the educators, and a commitment to research, development, and service. The school focuses on providing high quality and modeling high quality education for young children that focuses on developmentally appropriate practice and teaching the whole child, with curricular emphases on nature-based education and social, emotional, and mindfulness education. It started in 1934, so this is an 87-year tradition and part of the department, and it was developed out of needing to create a space to support the educational programs at the university. As Katie is going to talk in a couple of minutes, the nature-based program and work we do has grown out of our work with the place and where we're situated, and the research and commitment of our educators to help our undergraduates learn about cutting edge practices and ways of thinking and being as educators. All of our work is grounded in relationships and a strong commitment to community. Just to provide a little bit of information about the demographics of the children and families who attend the lab school. We have, Katie, did you want to take over? We have a diverse population that reflects some of our community. We support children with special needs, and we have 14 different home languages that are represented in our classrooms.
And we look at this as a means for discussion as well. We have the community applies to attend the lab school. We have quite a waiting list. And we look at who are we serving, who and which populations are we underserving, and who are we providing access in this program, in all of our programs. You can move to the next slide, Jen. Okay, so what I want to do, just as our first presenter did, is that I want to tell you a story. And oral language and oral stories are a way to share history. And so just as Jen said, we have been a lab school for 87 long years. And I had the luxury of attending the University of Delaware as an undergraduate. I graduated from the program, went out, taught in the public school system, and then was hired and came back about 17 years ago. When I was hired, this is the building on the far right that we were housed in. It was a part of main campus at the University of Delaware. We did a lot of place-based education. We traveled to, or we walked, didn't travel, we walked to all of the other buildings and the different amenities that were a part of a main campus. And so on the upper right, or on the upper left, I'm sorry, is in Gore Hall. It's a beautiful building with lots of architecture, lots of shapes. We would take the children and do shape hunts. We would build shapes with our bodies, and we would marvel over what sorts of architecture was there and what we could do in our block area. In the bottom left-hand corner, we would travel out front of you can see the pillars at our Morris Library. And this is a fountain that was out front of it, and children are drawn to water. And we would find that we would go there often, and the children would, put their hands in the water and splash in the water and watch the water move. And lots of great discussions took place around that. And so the story continues when in 2010, we were moved off campus. And I don't go as far to say displaced, but it sure felt that way. It sure felt like we were being moved off of main campus and put onto what the university wanted or was referring to as the children's campus. And so, I was a bit down, I would say, and a bit lost because my curriculum was so focused on all of the wonderful places and spaces that were afforded to us on main campus. And I really didn't know what I was going to do. And so what I did was I went outside because outside brings me a lot of peace. And so I found this amazing community trail in the city of Newark, right out back of our new space. And so this is a picture of that trail, of the James F. Hall Trail. And since it is a community city of Newark trail, that means that community members are walking or running or exercising or taking their dogs for a walk, pushing their strollers. It really isn't a school only trail. This is a trail that undergraduates are using, but also community members are using, a place of connection. And so years before the lab school nature preschool program ever started, I felt you can switch it, Jen, that's fine. We felt drawn to the water just as we had been, at that fountain out front of Morris Library. And that water was different. It wasn't water, cleaned, chlorinated water, but it was the water of the earth. It was the creek water. And so we were drawn to that green bridge that you saw in that first picture, but the children wanted to, get in. And so what we did was we made that happen. And so Jen, you can turn to the next slide. And so we looked at, what could we do with this space? And so what we needed to do was we needed to partner. We needed to partner with and have communications and build relationships with the UD grounds crew. We needed to talk to the city of Newark. This wasn't our land. This wasn't part of our school. This was the land surrounding our school. This was the space outside of the playground. And we needed to have conversations. And so, like I said, we needed to talk to City of Newark. We needed to talk to, the officials at the University of Delaware. We needed to talk to the Delaware Natural Resources. We found out that the space that we wanted to move into the woods, because my heart was breaking out of those four walls of my indoor classroom, we needed to figure out what was that land. And we found out that it was protected wetlands. And so we couldn't build on that land, and we didn't want to build on that land, but we sure as heck wanted to make sure that nobody else was going to build on that land. And so we started to bring our kids out there. And so 5 years ago, we started the Nature Preschool program. These are some of our features of the outdoor learning environments. I wish that I could take you to show you all of it. It was really hard to pick which ones to highlight. We have several trails that are wooded. We have, outdoor easels. I know that in the last slide, they talked about mud kitchens. When I talked about the partnerships and building relationships, the start of the Nature Preschool program was very, very financially sound. It did not cost very much money because we wanted to use what was there. We wanted to use and be a part of the nature that was provided to us. But we also connected with Engineers Without Borders at the UD Engineering Department, and they designed this outdoor easel as well as our mud kitchen. And then our families were able to build them for us. We bought the parts, and they were able to build it. So it really became a community kind of barn building, if you will, where everybody came together and made it happen. In the middle area, we have what's called a bird blind. And that's a small shed with windows that open, and the children can get inside and get very quiet and look and watch and listen and wonder and research. And so these two girls in this picture have books about birds, about backyard birds, native Delaware birds, and they're recording and making notes of what they saw. Skunk cabbage is a prolific plant that we watch as the seasons change. And we watch as, it starts to grow in the winter, and we get so excited that something is coming back to life when everything has been resting and taking that break. And so here the children are wandering through a patch of skunk cabbage that had gotten very wet in a rainstorm. We are all weather. So we are outside all weather all year. And so the children are able to experience what we start out in the fall as very warm, hot weather to cold temperatures in the winter. And then even in the snow and ice and rain, we want them to experience all of that because that builds their resilience. You can go to the next slide, Jen. We've also expanded our outdoor classrooms. The two upper pictures here, during the COVID-19, we were able to open an additional, is it 3 spaces, Jen? Additional 3 spaces outside. And so this space that's featured here is part of, it's outside of our playground fence, but it's much closer to our building than my wooded nature preschool area. We have a greenhouse in this area, and we are able to share the space with the master gardeners as part of the cooperative extension at the University of Delaware. Inside of our playground fence, which is also an outdoor learning environment, we have raised beds, container gardens. And I had to put a picture in there of one of my little ones that's climbing a tree, because we use and we experience all of the different spaces, both tall and short. Go ahead, Jen, to the next one. I would be remiss not to mention our indoor learning environments, because it is not safe for all people in Delaware to go outside in nature. There is some violence in our space. We are in a safe area, but, and we'll get to that in a bit, some of our outreach. Sorry for my dog barking. But in our indoor learning environments, we make sure to bring nature in, and we focus on the windows and looking out, but also bringing attention to the birds that are out there, bringing natural features like stuffed stumps, which the children can read on, bringing animals in as pets, and then thinking about natural woods that we could put into our block area. Just play does the video play, Jen? It's a short little clip, and I wish I could show you so many more, but we really do, at the heart of the Nature Preschool program, our biggest goal is connecting not only young children to the wonder of nature, but also our undergraduates, as Jen talked about in our mission. And so, like I said, using all of the seasons and using them to kind of springboard, just as that catapult there, and allowing the children to be free, allowing them to make choices, and using child-led, interest-driven curriculum that changes every day and every year.
Oops. So a part of the work that we do includes getting children and undergraduates to connect to the earth and to develop and strengthen their relationships to the earth, so that they can understand the role that they play in the earth and caring for the earth, and teaching others and bringing others into experiencing the world around them. This slide shows some of the ways that the lab school works to support and connect and care for the earth. You'll see over here, we, with a grant, they, lab school and faculty from the College of Agriculture put in edible gardens and We had, along with that, became a bunch of bees who actually built a large hive right near our nature classroom. Katie has built, she talked about community. She's built amazing community around and connections with people throughout the university, and connected with our beekeepers in the College of Agriculture. Katie, do you want to just fill in the story?
I would, Jen, but we're running out of time and I want you to get to talk about the undergrad. So go to the next slide.
So these are some of the works we do. We have a strong commitment to supporting nature-based education and getting our local educators to learn about nature-based education. We strongly work with the pre-service education teacher education program. We do outreach to the local high school, vocational programs for early childhood education, and do in-service teacher education. Part of the work we do is supporting about 400, it varies somewhat year to year, but 400 undergraduate student experiences annually. The students are embedded and connected to the lab school over their 4 years in the program, starting in their first year with observations of children, connecting theory and practice, and what they're learning about development in the observations with children. Then the lab school plays a significant role with initial field placements, starting with the students in their sophomore year. They take 2 courses. They take a course with an intro to the field, an intro to foundations with me, where I teach theory into practice. It's a theory into practice focus, and Katie teaches practice into theory co-requisite about what practice looks like. And we worked closely to create connections and make our classes inform one another. At that time, all the students have a full day field placement in the lab school where they work very closely with the lab school teachers. During their junior year, they take their methods courses, and some of the students have early field placements, again, in the laboratory school. Some of our teachers, undergraduates, have student teaching experiences, and other students throughout the university have internship opportunities. What we do in the lab school is very special in the ways that the lab school teachers support the early educators throughout all of their field placements. But we have a daily routine, which includes a pre-session where the students come in and they talk about what has been planned for the day, the intentionality, the thinking, and the ways that everyone will be working together as a collaborative teaching team to support the learning and education of the young children. We have 2 minutes. Oh, we're in trouble. And then, so I got stuck. So anyway, and then they teach together on the floor and in the woods, and process all of that throughout the day afterwards. I explained we have courses. Where should we go? One of the things we do in our science courses and our math courses is we buddy really closely with the lab school. I found that my undergraduates often had anxiety about teaching science. They didn't know where to start with teaching with engaging in nature. They weren't necessarily comfortable engaging in nature and exploring scientific ideas. And one of the things I work to do throughout my time with them is getting them to take chances and to learn alongside the children, and to be open to being curious and understanding the world through work collaboratively with children and with the land.
Jen, I think you're going to have to go to the last slide. And please take time to look through the slides. I think they're going to be shared. That way you're able to take a look at the other.
Where to, Katie?
The last slide, because we're out of time. There you go.
So thank you, everyone, for letting us be here and share our work. And you can feel free to contact us or find our website or our insight get bits into our classroom from Facebook.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation and to all the panelists in general. Now, we would like to invite questions from members of our audience. We would like you to use the question and answer tab as the chat has been disabled. I see that there are already some comments and questions. They're posted for the panelists. So I will start with, let's see, I'll start with Deborah's question. And Deborah wrote, and this is open to all of the panelists. So Deborah wrote, I'm curious about the objectification and the nature of nature and the framing of innocence of somehow nature is conceived as outside of us as human and children. How can we disrupt this dominant discourse? And this is connected, of course, to yesterday's presentation when Julia spoke about how we're all a part of nature. I'll open it to the panelists who would like to start us off with an answer.
So Shawnee, there were two parts, objectifying nature, and what was the second part?
So it's the objectification of nature and the framing of the innocence of the child. And with that, in terms of a nature perspective, and the conception or the thought that nature is outside of us, right? So connecting to our presentation yesterday, how do you reframe that in your own research, Monica, or perhaps in your research, Jennifer, with others? And I know, Keith, you spoke about your lived experiences. So how would you address this question?
I can make a stab to start with.
Okay,
what we're learning from Indigenous perspectives is that we are not separate from nature. We are interconnected. In fact, as humans, we are dependent on nature. So it's the opposite of objectifying. It's learning to see all of nature as a subject and as ourselves dependent on the gifts of nature and an imperative to be grateful and to give back. So I think our learning from Indigenous perspectives is the opposite. In that way. I'll speak to that first part anyway. Someone can take up some of the other aspects.
Okay, thank you. I see Keith, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just want to reinforce what Monica said. I once was told by an elder that if the water stops flowing and the sun stops shining and the earth stops growing, we will not exist. But if we stop existing, the earth will thrive. So not only are we have a relationship with nature, we are dependent on it. And we be respecting, the earth much more than we do as a community and as a world. So definitely, I think we need to teach that respect, that love and honor what we were given to us as gifts from whoever we believe, and honor each other's beliefs in that way too.
Thank you for that perspective, Monica and Keith. Jennifer, I see your hand is up.
Yes. So one of the things the panelists were talking about yesterday was seeing yourself as separate from nature and needing to go into nature to experience nature. I found that with our undergraduates, many of our undergraduates have not had strong experiences with nature, or they have this disconnected perspective. So one of the things I do with our science course is working to help them connect to the earth and to see their role and their impact and their relationship with the earth as a part of their lived experience. They go out and engage in sit spots every week. And at first they're like, I have to go sit outside for 15 minutes, but they learn to experience their land and experience their world through their five senses and write and think and share about them and photograph and discuss them. And they also look at the impact of human society and human life on the earth, and think about how do we think about and talk about this with young children? How do we work to create change from where we are and who we are? So,
okay, thank you for that, Jennifer. Claire, do you have something to offer? There's a question there's a question that's specific for you, so if you want to pass, okay. So to your specific question, then, Claire. There was intrigue around your 50 minutes community. So Daniel wrote, is this something that Toronto is sitting with? So I know you mentioned a few policy changes. So how does Toronto compare?
Yeah, so I think Toronto is like very kind of famous in many ways for our neighborhoods. And these are the pre-war neighborhoods that were kind of designed without the automobile and that are designed that naturally are these 15-minute neighborhoods. There's a mix of uses, there's transit, you can walk to places around you, there are parks. The inner suburbs, as I think and someone mentioned also, Scarborough, lack of green space in Scarborough is where there needs to be more investment with these 15-minute neighborhood design styles. So in the official plan, and then that goes down to the zoning bylaw, there's all these ways that 15-minute neighborhoods are encouraged. So they'll encourage mixed use. So maybe like resident or commercial at grade with residential on top. Transit-oriented development. So now with all these GO stations going in, and anywhere there's a transit station, there's all these density requirements that says now around these transit stations, we need to meet a certain amount of density. So they're trying to bring people, they're trying to have people live around transit. Other things are parkland requirements, densities around schools and amenities. So I think in many ways, this is something that Toronto is proud of in these neighborhoods, but recognizing that it isn't distributed equally. And we saw that in my presentation, that there are many factors that limit certain neighborhoods and many inner suburbs of Toronto to achieving these 15-minute neighborhoods, but that the policy very much encourages that. It's all about mixed use, walkable, pedestrian friendly, all of these things that are kind of keywords for 15-minute neighborhoods. I'd say where it ends up being really important is when say a developer or the municipality is reviewing a neighborhood, doing a master plan. Are there how hard are these policies being pushed? How much are these things being required versus are they more aspirational and that people kind of push them to the sidelines when they're actually being approved? So I think that's where the important piece is. Toronto definitely has the intention for it, but it's a matter of them being actualized once developments are improved.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Claire, for that. On the heels of that, and perhaps you could share, or if further research is needed, that's okay as well. I'm thinking about funding. You just spoke about inequity. How does the allocation of funding impact these? What communities can do these 15 minutes neighborhood? Because I know from my experience living in the Kipling and Steeles area, and now living in St. Clair and Bathurst, I think St. Clair and Bathurst have a more realistic, and this is Midtown, more realistic, approach to that 15 minutes, whereas Kipling and Steele, everything is so far away. The transit takes so long to come and run so infrequently, right? How does funding outside of policy or big P politics might impact this? And I also open this to other panelists as well.
Yeah, I'd say I would love to do more research on it as well. But what first comes to mind is that it seems like transit is really the piece that is driving investment. So where there's a new transit station, then there will be density requirements, then all housing will come up. And so I would say it's a matter of where the city is identifying a need and a direction for transit, and then very much all the funding that would come with that. So I think it's important that however the transit is directed, it's done in an equitable manner into neighborhoods where there's a need for transit, not necessarily a lot of residential at this point, or like a lot of political or financial interest. Because sometimes there'll be a transit station because maybe it's a very affluent neighborhood, or there's a lot of like political interest for that to come in. So I think, again, I'd love to look more into it, but the intersection between funding and transit as the kind of what gets all these other balls moving connected to a 15-minute neighborhood is important.
Okay, thank you for that, Claire. Open in case other panelists want to answer or speak to this. If not, then we'll move on to another question. So Monica and your research team, as well as Jennifer and Katie, you spoke to the diversity in terms of the participants. And I know, Keith, you mentioned in terms of your own background, right? About accessibility to outdoor experiences. Following Julia yesterday, we were going to talk about outdoor experiences versus being in nature. So how can you speak to the inequities that persist, even in terms of who gets to have access to these outdoor spaces, and what does that mean for promoting equity and meaningful land-based learning in ECE centers? Let's see. I'll let Monica. I see you're ready to go.
You ask really big questions. You ask really big questions, and I don't know if I have big answers. But I would say in the sites that we're looking at, for the most part, they are in low-income neighborhoods, and our partner agencies that we're working with, this is intentional to provide services for families in low-income neighborhoods. And yes, many of them do not have a lot of access to green space, but what we're focusing on is how can we sort of mitigate that, even just by raised flower beds, by encouraging them to take the children outside the fence, because sometimes there are green spaces close by planting with the children inside. We have one center that's not even on ground level. It's like up on a balcony. All it has is a bit of AstroTurf, and it has one little tree in a box and a few flower boxes. But the educators have encouraged the children to look up, look at the clouds, look at the sky, feel the wind, be grateful for the rain, capture the rain and use it to water your flowers. So that perspective, the dandelions growing in the cracks, that, I can't provide more green space. That's people have more power than I do. But thinking about how can we change perspective so we can, maximize that perspective with what little they have.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, I'll go to Keith and then Katie and Dr. Jennifer.
Yes, I would love to answer. Sorry, there's a little bit of noise in my background right now. My family just walked in the door and I'm trying to escort them out of the door. Thanks to Zoom, it's all here. So I'm here, I'm vulnerable, and this is me. But to answer that in terms of Delaware and specifically Newark, Delaware, what we've been doing, and the rest of the slideshow, which we were not able to share with you, is the UD Lab School is doing a lot of professional development, both for in-service teachers out in the public school system, which would be K2 teachers, even K4, as well as some trainings for childcare workers through different initiatives. One of the initiatives is the Let's Go Outside initiative, which is very similar, Monica, to what it sounds like you all are doing, with the exception of we do not take the focus of Indigenous people. So thank you for helping us to think about that through that lens. But I think that another piece of the puzzle is with urban planning. And Claire, I'm so excited about the work that you're doing, because that's what we should be doing. We should be looking at where are the green spaces? How can they get to them? For example, one of our outreaches is Wilmington Head Start, and right out front of their center is a crack house. And so it is not safe for them to take their children outside of the playground fence. And sometimes it's not even safe for them to go onto the playground. And so the part of looking at how we can bring nature in and looking at our environments and creating even our classroom spaces as spaces of beauty. And I know you mentioned Reggio Emilia as the third teacher, or the environment being the third teacher, but looking at the amount of plastic, the amount of bright colors, the lighting, looking at the windows, looking at just like you said about your focus, right? Look up, look out, look around, and then bringing things in and really thinking more intentionally about our spaces.
Okay, thank you. Keith, do you have anything to add, or Claire?
Yeah, I did. I just got a little distracted. Sorry. The first thing that came to mind was, oh, geez, I swear I'm exhausted. I've been doing this all day.
Thank you for being with us.
So I wanted to share, what was I going to say? Oh, I remember being a young EC and being male really made a difference as far as the way that I looked at safety. And I think safety goes with nature. And I think comfort, a lot of times we are hypocrites, and including the way that we have access to space. Who has access to space? What are parks for? For people to walk their dogs and feel like that belongs to them. Yet people who are houseless or who are using, people who are using drugs or have mental health don't belong there. So the same goes for these spaces for children, but also the way that we have made early childhood. We don't believe that children are a unique individual. We say, oh, all children need to be doing this. And if a child climbs a tree, it's about our risk. And we don't want to go outside in the rain because we're going to get wet and it's uncomfortable to be cold. And we pretend that we're trying to keep children warm. Meanwhile, I was a child who played outside in minus 35 degrees and loved it. I remember lying in a snowbank, falling asleep, So really, I think a lot of the things we talk about as far as access and our relationship with Earth is our own personal. I think people need to look at themselves and really what's the barriers, because, stepping outside and taking a walk with children, talking, if it's appropriate, talking about that place where people use drugs. I don't use the word crack house, but the place where people use drugs, and talk about it. What's happening in the world? I think children need to know. That's some of the barriers and some of the issues where we keep perpetuating this us versus them. And I think taking a walk in your neighborhood that doesn't have grass could be very beneficial to children as well. What's out there? What did we do to the world? There's nothing wrong with pointing it out. And I think maybe when children learn early on that we need to make different decisions to keep sustaining this, thinking, oh, our 7 generations, maybe that will evoke some change. And so I really strongly believe that I think we all could take a look at how we could do things differently and really embrace the potential of children. Not children are our future. Our future is right now, and what we're doing right now impacts everyone.
All right, thank you. I'll open to other members of Jennifer. I see that you're responding to Gail, but do you have anything to add, or other members of Dr. Monica's research team have anything to add in regards to this question?
I could respond out loud to Gail's question, which was that ECEs are concrete and practical learners. So how do we have specific examples about bridging Indigenous ways and Western approaches in urban areas? And I can't speak to Indigenous ways, but I began my work in nature-based education when doing my master's in New York City, and working with schools and children in the middle of the city. And natures are all around us. It doesn't matter where we are. As Keith was saying, the weather is there. There are animals and birds and so many insects and that are all in the city. And we need to embrace the nature that is there and experience it. And the work I did, which was up in Harlem, we looked at the tree right in front of the school. We splashed in the puddles. We looked out the windows. We had bird feeders on the windows, and we walked to the parks. And I found the children were much more comfortable in their environment and moving around their neighborhood and going out for walks. And the teachers were able to do that work as well. We took the kids for walks in a way that sometimes in suburban areas, I find teachers not as willing to leave the school grounds. So I think it's a matter of how we frame our thinking and where we look and how we engage.
Okay, thank you for that, Jennifer. And I want to ask member of Dr. Monica's research team in relation to this question, and I know some of you might be recent ECE graduates or soon to be ECE graduates, but working on the project, how have you now come to conceptualize how you can more meaningfully incorporate? So following what Dr. Jennifer said, Keith, Claire, and other panelists, but how can you more meaningfully incorporate Indigenous ways of being in the way that you look at land-based learning once you embark on your own practice?
I think it just goes back to that kind of what we've done ourselves, like how we are incorporating our own learning and how we are reflecting on ourselves and how we are incorporating building relationships and kindness to all aspects of our life. I feel like once I've started doing that, that's how I've been able to confidently go into these centers, even as a research assistant, to kind of see where children are making those connections with nature and where they're building relationships with other people, and kind of just being open. And I always go back to it kind of as how have I grown as a person, and what can I incorporate from all my reflections into what I teach children, or what children have to teach me, and what I'm open to learning from them, really.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Kayla. Is there anyone else? Anna, I see you're ready to go.
Yes, to add to Kayla's point, I think that once we went into these centers, the children were actually teaching us to see these relationships and these gratitude and care and reciprocity. So I think what I learned from it is noticing their interactions with each other, their interactions with nature, because they are already doing it. I think what happens is in that transition of, a child to the adult, I think we sort of lose that connection. And I think that we need to go back into our childhood and recognize that we were connected to the land, and we can still build that connection as adults. So just that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
I'd like to speak as well.
Okay.
I think something big that I took in with doing this project is it's not after our meetings, it's over. I started to realize that it was changing everything I was doing with just going outside on walks, and I would take it in differently. I remember something that we said was we'd always have like headphones in. Now I don't have headphones in because I want to listen to everything around me. I want to hear the rain falling. I want to hear the birds chirping. And I feel like even just now seeing it different, well, I feel like I'm seeing it differently. It just changed my mood and changed how I see it. Like, for instance, rain. I used to always think, oh, it's raining outside. I don't want to go outside. And now, even though it's raining, I still want to go outside because I feel like I'm breathing in this fresh air, and I feel like my excitement to it, and also going on to the our visits with the children, I feel like even them, they see it and they're not like, oh, it's raining, we have to go back inside. Now they're like trying to stick out their tongue to catch the rain, or want to find a puddle that they can step in. So I see the difference there as well.
Okay, thank you. I see your hand, Keith. Is there anyone else before we go to Keith? No? Okay. Keith.
I think Taylor maybe wanted to say something.
Sorry, Taylor. I was
Sorry, Keith.
looking up.
Yeah, I was just going to share something quickly. Something huge for me, because I'm not from Canada and I came from Barbados to Canada. And I had difficulty at first trying to figure out my place in learning about Indigenous perspectives and understanding it myself, and then learning how I could bring it to children. And as Kayla said, the biggest thing is like learning about your place in it first. And I think that's like a huge thing for that international students who are going to be working with children really need to discover first for themselves their place in how the treaties granted them the ability to be here. And then that will, if with their reflection, they can learn how they can give back.
Okay, thank you, Kayla. And I'm from Jamaica. Well, I did say that. So you're among company. Keith.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to take up too much space, but and I really didn't think I'd be as involved or as interested. So, but it made me think of, someone said, we know about residential schools and the horrible past of Canadian history, and these children had to endure that, but we don't want to talk about it with children. And that's really what I'm getting at. We have to be comfortable with getting uncomfortable and challenge ourselves about what is the capacity of children. I remember seeing someone in pain when I was a child, and I wanted to help them, and I wanted to know, and I had the empathy, and it brought me here in my career to make sure that I'm doing something meaningful in my life. And so I think one of the things I would love to share is that we need to stop underestimating children. They have so much knowledge. We are lifelong learners. They are teachers just like we are. And I think that's the thing I want to share, and I will stop taking up space. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And actually you spearheaded into my final question. And I promised the audience this is the final question. So for the educators or practitioners in the room, what would be one recommendation then as it relates to teacher training, or the way in which we teach educators or future educators about how to embark on this land-based pedagogy? And for Claire, I know there was a question that was posted as to how does your conceptualization of a planning or environmental planning impact the ECE sector, right? So how can the ECE sector engage in planning for the environment? So specifically 2 questions. So for educators, what does this mean for teacher training? And for Claire, I'm not saying that you're not an educator, but based on your bio, how can we implement this in our planning? Okay, and I'll leave it open.
Sure, I can respond to that question, and I saw it come in, so I did just a little bit of thinking. But I think a big way for ECE sector to engage in planning for the environment for children is this encouragement of that we are all active participants in the planning process, and ultimately like decisions that are made by council members that are supposed to and do represent us. So that from a very young age, encouraging this like civic engagement, and that like these are spaces you belong in, these are spaces you have a right to have opinions over, and maybe encouraging some of that like interaction with the environment around you. Where do you feel safe? What are your favorite spaces? Why? What would you like to see, to get thinking about like the types of places we want to see, and then the types of cities we want to see, the types of neighborhoods, the types of roads, what we want to have access to, and connecting that to there is actually a statutory process that requires that the public is engaged, and that's that's like the minimum opportunity for people to get involved. And there's more beyond that, but I would say like from an early age, encouraging this interaction and relationship with the planning system, and that children are members of this system and of our public process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Claire, and thank you, Zenat, for that answer. So just really quickly, I know we only have 1 minute. Is there anyone who has a recommendation for future ECE training? Yes, Jennifer?
I think it's really important that we help emerging educators see what's possible and experience the power and the importance of learning with the land and with others in collaboration, and thinking about what it means to be stewards of the land. And if I think that it's hard to break out of an existing framework and just be told about it, that if someone can experience other ways of thinking and other ways from what they've experienced in the past, other ways of seeing what they might want to work towards and help create, then it gives them imagery and experiences they can move towards later in life.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're on the 8:30 mark. So thank you for our engaging panelists. You've really kept us engaged and in the conversation for the past 2 hours. Can't believe it has been 2 hours. And I thank the members of the audience who were here with us and have stayed with us towards the end. We would like to thank our partners as well. OIZ at the University of Toronto, George Brown and the Center for Excellence in Quebec, and our funders, the Atkinson Foundation, the Margaret and Wallace McCain Family Foundation, and the Lawson Foundation. We look forward to having you tomorrow for our final session, and have a good day and take care.